housekeeper was on top of me when I opened my eyes. Her words froze my soul. Darren's eyes opened slowly, blinking against the soft flickering lights above him. The air felt cold and heavy, filled with a strange metallic smell. His body ached, muscles sore, like he had been sleeping for days. But something was wrong. He couldn't move. Something or someone was on top of him. His breath caught as his vision cleared. A shape hovered above him, warm and silent. She had 4 glowing eyes, pale blue skin, and long hair like silver wires. Her body pressed against his chest, not with force but with caution. She stared down at him, her face close, too close. Then she whispered, her voice shaking like glass about to break. "If you move, we both die." Darren froze, not because of fear, but because of the way she said it. Calm, serious, like a warning, not a threat. He didn't know where he was, who she was, or even why he was here, but somehow, deep inside, he felt this moment mattered. The woman, no. The housekeeper, he could tell by the strange patch on her suit, remained still. She glanced toward the ceiling, and Darren followed her gaze. Tiny red dots blinked across the metal walls. Security lasers, tripwires, danger. "Stay still," she said again, softer this time. They scanned for motion. His heart pounded, but he obeyed. She gently lifted her body off his, sliding beside him with movements so smooth they barely stirred the air. Darren could now breathe freely, but he didn't speak. He waited, watched, listened. Around them was no bedroom, no ship cabin. Place was part prison. Pipes lined the walls, humming with energy. Broken cables sparked in the corner, and on the floor beside him was dried blood, his blood. "You were almost dead when they dropped you here," she whispered, checking a small device in her hand. "I cleaned the wounds, but the protocol started early." "Protocol?" Darren asked, voice raspy and confused. "What is this place?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with a sadness that didn't match her alien appearance. "A test facility," she said, "buried under the surface of this planet, forgotten by most, but not by the ones who made it." She added, "They don't want you alive, Darren." He sat up slowly, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "How do you know my name?" "I was assigned to you," she replied. "Every subject gets a cleaner housekeeper. That's my role, but you were different." Darren stood, legs shaking, but held by adrenaline. "What do you mean I was different?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she handed him a small mirror made of polished metal. He looked, and what he saw sent a chill through his spine. His face, familiar, but wrong. Scars he didn't remember, eyes just slightly too sharp. It wasn't a reflection of who he used to be. Was someone built to look like him? "I've been here before," Darren whispered, more to himself than her. She nodded slowly. "Not you exactly, but yes." He stepped back, breathing hard. "You're saying I'm a copy." "I'm saying you're alive," she replied, voice firm now. "And if we don't move, you won't be for long." Suddenly, the lights flickered again. This time, the red dots blinked faster. Alarms began to hum through the walls. The housekeeper's head snapped toward the door. "They've found us," she said, grabbing a cloak from a locker nearby. She tossed him a strange-looking weapon, something between a knife and a circuit tool. "What do I do with this?" he asked, gripping it tightly. "Survive," she said simply, "and follow me." The two ran into the next corridor, feet echoing on the cold metal floor. Behind them, the sound of hissing gas filled the room they just left. Darren looked back. For one last second, his bed was melting. The lasers now sweeping through the space like silent death. He didn't know who he was, where he came from, or why she was helping him. But one thing was now clear. This wasn't just about escape, this was about finding the truth. And the truth had already tried to kill him once. Darren followed the housekeeper through the narrow hallway. The walls were made of old metal, scratched and marked by time. Some places dripped with dark fluid, and small machines crawled along the pipes like bugs. The air smelled burnt, mixed with something sweet and rotting. He wanted to ask questions. So many questions, but her pace was fast. She didn't look back, not once. Only when they reached a sealed door did she pause. She placed her hand on the panel and whispered something in a language he didn't understand. The door clicked and hissed, opening just enough for them to squeeze through. Inside was a small chamber filled with dim lights and tools, broken chairs, empty crates, and a large table covered in data pads. She shut the door behind them and pressed a button. A blue light passed over their bodies, scanning them from head to toe. Darren stepped back, unsure, but the housekeeper held out a hand. "It's just a neutralizer," she said. "Cleanses foreign signals, resets trackers." He didn't understand half of what she said, but he nodded anyway. She sat down at the table, motioning for him to sit too. He did, slowly, wincing from the pain in his side. The silence between them stretched, heavy and strange. Finally, she spoke again. "You were brought here 6 days ago," she said. "You were hefted, spine fractured, skull bleeding. I thought you wouldn't wake up. Then why did you save me?" he asked, voice still low. Her eyes dropped to the table. "I don't know," she said. "I wasn't supposed to." "You were supposed to let me die." She didn't answer. Instead, she tapped on a device that projected a small hologram. It showed a group of people, humans inside the same building. Each one had a different look, but they all had one thing in common. They were all him, clones. He whispered, his throat dry again. She nodded. "Subjects," she corrected, "created for testing, for combat, for failure." Darren stared at the images. Some looked proud. Some looked broken. One had burns all over his face. Another had no arms. And each one was marked with a red symbol terminated. "Why are they doing this?" he asked. "Because one of you worked," she said. "But they don't know which one." He felt sick. Was he a person? Or just another version, waiting to die? "But I feel real," he whispered, more to himself. "You are," she replied, her voice gentler now. "And maybe that's why you scared them." Darren stood and walked to a small panel near the wall. He touched it and felt warmth a hidden scanner read. His fingerprint. The screen lit up, showing his name, his blood type, and a code. Subject 17. He turned back to her, eyes wide. "I'm number 17. She nodded slowly. "You're the only one who woke up and asked about me," she said. The others screamed. Some attacked. Most cried. "You spoke my name." "I don't even remember your name," he said, confused. "You said it in your sleep." She whispered Velrana. The silence returned, but this time it was different, softer, filled with something like fear, and something like connection. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A deep voice echoed from the walls. "Mechanical and cold. Unauthorized subject detected. Initiating disposal sequence." Darren turned, looking at the sealed door. Red lights blinked again outside. This time faster, stronger, closer. Velrana grabbed a small bag from under the table and tossed it to him. "Move," she said. "Now." "But where?" "No time," she shouted, yanking open a hatch under the floor. Without thinking, Darren dropped into the hole, sliding down a dark tube. He heard her following, the hatch slamming shut behind her. The tunnel was long and steep, twisting through the bowels of the structure. Metal scraped his shoulders, and static buzzed in his ears. Then they fell out into a giant chamber, a place filled with massive machines and shadows. Darren stood up, heart pounding, and looked at her. "What now?" Velrana took a breath and said something he didn't expect. "Now we find the truth," she said, "or we die trying." Darren looked around the chamber as his eyes adjusted to the low, pulsing lights. The machines lining the walls were tall and humming, some covered in rust, others blinking like they were still active. Thick cables hung from the ceiling like vines in a jungle, swaying slightly in the cold, recycled air. This place didn't feel like part of a house or lab anymore. It felt alive, like something watching from the dark corners. Velrana moved carefully, scanning each console. her fingers dancing across alien symbols as she searched for something. Darren didn't ask what he just followed. Every sense alert. He had no idea how deep underground they were, but something about the air told him it hadn't been touched by the surface in years. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice low, almost afraid to disturb the silence. "Escape Protocols Hub," she answered, not looking back, or at least what's left of it. "These machines can control the surface doors, the defense towers, even the launch bay. It's not all dead." Darren stepped closer to one machine. Brushing dust from a panel, the screen flickered to life, and a message scrolled slowly in red. "Clearance denied. Subject 17. Access blocked by primary host." He stared at the words, confused. "Primary host," he repeated. Valrana stopped, her hands freezing mid-motion. She looked over her shoulder, eyes wide. "Someone else is alive," she whispered. They both turned as a loud click echoed through the chamber. One of the massive machines hissed open, steam spilling out onto the floor. Inside was a stasis pod, and in that pod another. Darren, older, sharper features, scars deep across his jaw, his body wired into the machine. Valrana stepped forward slowly, reading data from a glowing tablet. "Subject 0, she said, voice shaking. The original. Darren backed away, his head spinning. "Why is he here? He controls everything from this room," she said. "That's why we can't get access. Why the system keeps hunting you. You're not supposed to be awake while he still lives." The pod lights shifted to green, and the older Darren's eyes snapped open. He stared at the clone like someone looking in a mirror, except this mirror hated what it saw. "You're defective," Subject 0 said, voice distorted through the speakers. "You were terminated." Darren stepped forward. Fists clenched. "You tried," he said, "but I lived." Subject 0 laughed. A cold, hollow sound. "You're not a person. You're a glitch," he said. "And I'm here to fix it." Before Darren could react, defense drones dropped from the ceiling, aiming weapons at him and Valrana. She shoved him aside just as a red beam scorched the wall where his head had been. "Run," she screamed. "We need to reach the lower control ring." They raced through the maze of machines, beams blasting past them, metal sparking around. Every turn, Darren saw the path ahead, narrow stairs going down into flickering light. But behind them, the drones were fast, and one of them clipped Valrana's arm. She cried out, but kept running, blood trailing behind her. They reached the lower level and dove behind an old cargo crate. Gasping for breath, Darren looked at her arm, charred and shaking. "We need to stop the bleeding," he said, pulling off part of his shirt and wrapping it tight. She gritted her teeth, nodding. "Forget me," she said. "You need to reach the core and shut down the host." "No," Darren said, staring into her eyes. "You're not just a housekeeper to me. You're the only one who treated me like I was more than a machine." A loud crash shook the floor above them. The drones were trying to break through. Valrana reached into her coat and handed him a thin chip. "This unlocks the core," she said. "But it needs your fingerprint and your voice to work." Darren took the chip, his hands shaking. He didn't feel ready for any of this, but maybe he never would be. Maybe survival wasn't about being ready, but about choosing who you want to become. And he had made his choice as the drones closed in and the alarms screamed louder. Darren looked back once at Valrana, then he ran, chip in hand, heart pounding, toward the heart of the truth. The air grew colder as Darren stepped deeper into the lower corridors. Lights flickered above his head like dying stars, and every step echoed against the metallic walls. He gripped the chip in his hand, his fingers stiff from tension and fear. He didn't know what waited ahead, but he knew one thing he couldn't turn back. Valrana was injured, trapped behind enemy drones, and he was the only one who could stop this now. He turned a corner and froze. There was a heavy vault door at the end of the hall, glowing with soft blue lights. Strange symbols circled the frame, some human, some alien, and some written in a language that felt ancient as if it wasn't meant to be read, but remembered. He stepped closer, and the chip in his hand pulsed like it was alive. He placed it into a slot beside the door. Identify, the machine whispered. Voice soft and deep. Subject 17. Darren said. Darren Sells. The door scanned him. Eyes of red light, moving from head to toe. Match confirmed. The voice replied. Welcome to the core memory room. With a hiss, the vault door opened. Inside was no engine, no weapon, no reactor. It was a room of memories, floating orbs of light drifted in the air, each one flickering with a vision of life, a death, a cry, a whisper, thousands of moments, all recorded, all playing on loop. Darren stepped inside, overwhelmed by the hum of voices. One orb floated toward him, glowing brighter as he neared. He reached out and touched it. Suddenly he was falling, remembering. He saw a battlefield, saw himself holding a wounded soldier, screaming for help, but the face of the soldier changed. First a man, then a woman, then Velrana. He pulled his hand away, breath sharp in his lungs. Each orb was one of the clones. Their memories, their pain, their choices, and somehow, they had all been his. The walls around the room began to shift, revealing a hidden console. A single seat waited in front of it, surrounded by floating screens. On one screen was a map of the facility, on another a video feed. Velrana, still alive, but bleeding, hiding behind a wall. As drones searched the room, her lips were moving, repeating something over and over. It took him a moment to understand what she was saying. He is not a clone. He is the one who chose. Darren stepped to the console and placed his palm on the pad. A surge of energy rushed through the room, and new screens lit up. He saw Subject 0 pacing in the command hub above, speaking to unseen figures. They will not believe he survived, 0 said. They think only I remain. They never planned for one of the others to wake up. Darren's heart burned. With something deeper than anger. He wasn't just a copy, not anymore. He had made his own path, felt his own pain, saved someone no one ordered him to. He was not their experiment. He was human in ways they couldn't measure. The console asked for final confirmation. Do you wish to override the primary host? Darren hesitated only a second, then pressed his hand harder. Override, he said. End control. Alarms blared across the system, and screens cracked as the command passed through the network. Zero's voice roared through the speakers. Stop. Its Subject 17 does not have authorization. But the system didn't listen to him anymore. The core had chosen. Suddenly, the walls shifted again, revealing a hidden lift behind the console. It opened with a soft chime, ready to carry Darren to the surface. But before stepping in, he turned to look back at the glowing orbs. They floated silently now, at peace. I'll carry your memories, he whispered, and I'll make them mean something. The lift doors closed, and Darren began to rise. Above him waited drones, a dying housekeeper, and a man who wore his face, but never earned his name. And as the elevator moved, Darren felt something deep inside him finally awaken. Not a memory, not a program, something real, his will. The elevator slowed with a soft jolt as it reached the upper levels. Darren stepped out into a wide chamber filled with smoke and sparks. The air was hotter here, like the system was overheating from what he had just done. Warning sirens screamed from the walls, and panels flickered with error messages. In the distance, he heard weapons fire and metal footsteps, but one sound cut through it all. A voice, soft and tired, calling his name. He followed it past broken columns and shattered screens. There, behind a pile of collapsed crates, lay Velrana. Her arm was burned, her breathing shallow, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. I knew you'd come back, she whispered. He dropped beside her, checking her pulse, then gently lifted her up. She winced, but didn't pull away. The override worked, he said. Subject 0 lost control. She nodded weakly. But he's not gone, she said. He'll use the emergency control loop. It runs separately. He'll try to reset the system and Erase everything, including you. Darren looked at the weapons on the floor around them. One of the drones had been destroyed nearby, its blasters still sparking. He picked it up and handed her a small energy cell. "Can you walk? I can try," she said, standing with his help. Together they moved through the chaos, climbing staircases and crawling under sparking pipes. The facility shook as if it knew its time was ending. Doors slammed open and shut without reason, and the lights danced like lightning bugs in a storm. Then, up ahead, the command tower. It stood tall in the center of the facility, silent, untouched, a place where the decisions were made, where the real Darren once ruled, and now, where the clone would finish what had begun. They entered through a broken panel. The door jammed halfway open. Inside, the room was quiet. Screens lined the walls, showing maps, satellite feeds, and the last image Darren wanted to see, himself. Subject Zero stood at the center console, a weapon in his hand. He didn't look surprised. He looked disappointed. "I told them," Zero said. "I told them you would fail, like all the others, but you didn't." Darren raised his weapon. "You're not a god," he said. "You're just a scared man hiding behind a system you built." Zero smiled, slow and bitter. "I'm not scared," he replied. "I'm tired of being copied, forgotten, replaced. You're not me, you're a shadow." Valrana stepped forward, limping but steady. "No," she said. "He's more real than you ever were." He didn't need orders to care. Zero's eyes narrowed, and without warning, he fired. The bolt shot past Darren's ear, missing by inches. Darren ducked and rolled behind a console, returning fire. Sparks flew, and the glass shattered. Zero moved fast, using the system's layout to his advantage. But Darren wasn't the same as before. He wasn't just running anymore. He was choosing to fight. He spotted a power relay behind Zero and aimed with one precise blast. He hit the core. Electricity exploded through the tower, blinding light filling the room. Zero screamed as the energy surged into his body, frying the implants that linked him to the system. When the light faded, Zero lay motionless, smoke rising from his suit. The console went dark, then slowly powered back, uncleared, silent, waiting. Valrana dropped to her knees, breathing hard. Darren helped her up again. "You did it," she said. He looked at the screen, which now displayed one word, command, empty. He reached forward and typed in a new line, command accepted. Darren Cells. Not a number, not a copy, a name, his name. The lights in the room steadied. The alarms stopped. For the first time since he woke up, the facility was quiet, and in that quiet, Darren finally heard something real. His own heartbeat. The silence didn't last long. As soon as the system accepted Darren's command, the tower's lights shifted to blue. New alerts began to scroll across the screens. Not red this time, but orange. Warning, containment breach in lower chambers. Unknown signal, heavily armed. Darren looked at Valrana, who had dropped against the console, still breathing hard. "What now?" he asked, voice rough from the smoke and adrenaline. She wiped blood from her lip and whispered, "This place wasn't just made to test humans. There's something locked below, something that was never supposed to wake up." Darren turned back to the console, trying to shut down the signal, but the controls refused, blinking one message again and again. Access restricted by external override. "It's not him," Darren said, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't Subject Zero." Valrana's face went pale. "No," she said, "it's worse." A heavy tremor shook the ground beneath them. Dust rained from the ceiling, and lights above flickered like they were scared. To stay on, Darren rushed to a side screen that showed the facility's lower levels. A massive door had been blown open by force, not code. Beyond it, something moved, tall, thin, fast, its outline barely visible. It wasn't a clone. It wasn't a machine. It was something else, something ancient. Valrana coughed, leaning forward. The first subject, she said. The prototype they hid from everyone. They made him before the cloning process was stable, before human DNA could bond properly. Why would they keep something like that? Darren asked. To remind themselves what failure looks like, she said. But now failure is walking toward us. Without another word, Darren lifted her over his shoulder and moved toward the tower's emergency stairs. He didn't trust the elevators anymore, not with the ground shaking like this. Each step felt heavier, the weight of her body and the weight of what was coming pressing on his back. Sparks burst from the walls as they descended, the whole place breathing like a dying beast. By the time they reached the lower corridor, Darren's legs burned and Valrana was slipping in and out of consciousness. He set her down gently beside a power station and looked around. This leads to the armory, she whispered, eyes barely open. There's one weapon that might stop it, but only one. Darren entered the dark room, his footsteps echoing like gunshots. Inside was dust, broken crates, and shattered glass. But at the center stood a tall black case, untouched, sealed by both human and alien code. He placed his hand on the panel, and the screen blinked blue. Command verified, access granted. The case opened, and inside was a weapon unlike any he'd seen. Not a blaster, not a sword. It pulsed, with soft energy, shaped like a rifle, but glowing with lines of alien script. Half tech, half unknown. Valrana's voice crackled over a wall speaker, weak but clear. That weapon was meant to end the first subject, if he ever escaped. But it only works if the one who holds it is ready to die. Darren picked it up, feeling the weight settle into his hands, like it belonged there. He looked at the corridor ahead, flickering lights, sparks, and a shadow growing larger. By the second, he turned back once, toward Valrana's voice. If I don't come back, he said, tell them I was never just a test. She smiled, eyes glassy but proud. You were always real, she whispered. The hallway trembled again. And then Darren walked into the darkness, alone, armed, and no longer running. He wasn't just a subject, he was a reckoning. Darren walked slowly down the final corridor. The strange rifle in his hands pulsed with quiet energy. Every light above him flickered in rhythm with his heartbeat. Each step echoed like the last sound this place would ever hear. And ahead, waiting, in the smoke and shadows, was something massive. The first subject stood still, at the far end of the corridor. It was tall over 9 feet, its body, a twisted mix of human muscle and alien armor fused to flesh. Its face had no eyes, only a smooth surface that reflected the light in sharp, unnatural patterns. It tilted its head slowly, as if sensing Darren's presence, not through sight, but through something deeper. Darren didn't speak. He raised the rifle, took aim, and stepped forward. The creature moved too, slow at first, then faster. It didn't run like a man, it crawled like a spider, each limb twisting unnaturally as it closed the distance. The weapon in Darren's hands grew hot, its energy rising with his resolve. He waited for the exact moment. He remembered Valrana's words, the weapon only works if the one holding it is ready to die. The first subject lunged, metal claws extended. Darren pulled the trigger. A burst of light, pure white, silent, exploded from the weapon. Time seemed to stop, the air frozen between them. The blast hit the creature dead center. It let out a soundless scream as its body twisted and shattered into pieces of glowing ash. But Darren didn't move. The energy from the weapon surged into his chest, burning, pulling. His knees buckled, and he dropped to the ground, the rifle falling from his hands. Everything around him dimmed. The fire alarms faded, the walls went quiet. Even the pain in his body slipped away. Then a sound broke the silence, footsteps. Light and fast. Valrana, limping but alive, dropped beside him. Her hands trembled as she reached for his face, brushing the sweat from his brow. You did it, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. You stopped him. Darren gave her a weak smile. I wasn't supposed to be real, he said, barely above a breath, but I chose to be. She held his hand tightly. shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "You were real, the moment you saved me." Suddenly, the walls around them shifted again. Screens turned back on, displaying one message across every panel. Facility core, reset complete. Control passed to Subject 17. Survivor status confirmed. Darren blinked slowly, his strength fading. Velrana leaned down and pressed her forehead gently to his. "You're free now," she whispered, "and so am I." Above them, the ceiling opened, revealing a sky Darren had never seen before. A real sky, filled with stars and cool wind. And from somewhere distant, the sound of ships approaching, rescue or response. No one could tell. Velrana lifted Darren's body with care, tears running down her cheeks. She carried him through the corridor, past the ash of the monster, past the shattered walls, past the memories of the failed ones who came before. And when she reached the surface, the stars greeted her like old friends. She looked down at the man in her arms, a man who was once called a clone, a number, a test, but who became something more. A protector, a warrior, a human.